Hello, my name is Michael Cavanaugh. I represent the Amalgamated Clothing and Textile Workers Union here in the state of Maine. I'm here to introduce you to a very special film presentation called Leaving Home. It involves an important issue for all Maine citizens, the loss of jobs as corporations relocate plants and employment south of the border. The Congress will soon be voting on a free trade agreement with Mexico called NAFTA. What you're about to see is only a preview of what may happen on both sides of the border if NAFTA is approved. If you're concerned by what you see in this film, call Senator Mitchell and Cohen, Representatives Andrews and Snow. After all, someday it may be your job that is exported.
Hi, I'm Ned Beatty. Welcome to a special edition of We Do the Work called Leaving Home. It's about our free trade future. For years, the products the world market demanded were built in America. The parents of the baby boom generation fueled the American dream in the factories that built these products. Clothes, appliances, automobiles, Americans used to make the best of everything. But the world economy has changed. The jeans we wear, the cars we drive, the TVs we watch are being built somewhere else. And the jobs that went with them are leaving home. From Wall Street to Washington, there's a lot of talk these days about free trade. Many companies say they can't stay competitive unless they move to other countries where labor costs are cheaper, like Mexico. But is what's good for these companies good for all of us? In this program, we'll travel south of the border to see how free trade is treating Mexican workers in American-owned factories. And we'll motor through the Midwest to see how whole towns are struggling to survive when factories there pick up stakes, move to Mexico. Union City, Indiana is in the center of the state, on the Ohio border. In fact, half of the town is in Ohio in another time zone. People from around the region used to come here to work. Union City was once a thriving factory town. Now it's a town in deep trouble. There used to be 6,000 jobs here. Now there are only 1,000. In the past few years, 3 plants have moved or shut down. This Scheller Globe Auto Parts plant shut down and moved 30 miles away. This Westinghouse plant employed 800 people who built small motors for appliances. In 1989, Westinghouse sold the plant to A.O. Smith, and Smith moved the operations to Mexico.
We went through many stages, many losses, and we got used to them. And the Westinghouse was one of those stages we got used to. It was terrible.
Reverend Klosterheimer is a Lutheran minister in Union City.
But now I think, as I sense the people I work with, there is an awareness of what's happened. There's a search for hope.
We're going down to the dining room to eat dinner.
Go to the dining room.
To eat dinner.
I ain't got a penny on me.
Well, honey, you don't need any.
Janet Pratt is a nurse's aide at the Center of Hope Nursing Home. Before this job, she used to build small appliance motors at the Westinghouse plant. At the nursing home, she makes about 1/3 what she did at Westinghouse.
Open up. Good girl.
We've had to take some drastic changes, but who else in this country hasn't had to? It's all over. It's not just in Union City, it's all over. You have to go to today's society, today's economy, what happens? You have to learn to adjust to it. You have to make adjustments.
Part of Janet's adjustment was losing her home and moving into an apartment.
This is the first I've lived in an apartment. I always had my own home, but I couldn't afford to keep it. And so I now live in apartments. One thing I've had to adjust to that it's difficult for me, no washer and dryer.
Say Nana. Yeah, say Nana.
Janet's daughter works at a low-wage job and can't afford daycare. So when Janet gets home from the nursing home, she takes care of her grandson, Jarrett. Just after the plant closed, the company asked Janet to go to Juarez to train workers who would work in the new plant in Mexico.
First, I thought, you crazy? Do you think I'm going to go down there and help you out? I wanted to find out where my job was, where headed went. So that's why I had decided to go.
Janet made a home video of her trip to Juarez and the co-workers she trained to take over her job.
What I found there was a completely different world. You get into Juarez and nothing but run-down shacks, and they were hard-working people. They were working, doing the same thing I did up here, but they were working for 85 cents an hour. I up here was working for a lot more than that. When I left Westinghouse, I was making $13.65 an hour.
They pay the people ridiculously low wages, but you know the funny thing about that is when they ship that motor back up here, it still costs the same amount it did before it went down there, so somebody's getting rich and it ain't me.
The money seems to be all at the top 10% of wage earners in the country are the people with all the money. It's not filtering down. The trickle-down theory that Ronald Reagan talked about, it just isn't happening. And the people at the bottom of the ladder, like Fred and myself and the rest of my co-workers, we're the ones that's suffering.
Fred Davis and Brad Davis both work at Union City Auto Body, where they make bodies for step vans. They're worried that this locally owned factory is in jeopardy and may shut down too. The union workers in this plant just took a 20% pay cut, gave up most medical benefits and vacations and holidays to make sure the plant stays open. Perry Miller works in the personnel department at Union City Auto Body. He just got called back to his job after a 5-month layoff.
Like they say, you know, if your neighbor gets laid off, it's a recession. If you get laid off, it's a depression.
Perry's wife, Judy, used to work at Westinghouse before it closed. In addition to his work at the body company, he's also the mayor of Union City, Indiana.
This is a good town. We have very unique downtown with the buildings and things. There's some of them that need a repair, but this is what I would like to see changed.
Harold Westfall got a job at the body company after Westinghouse closed, but was eventually laid off there too when the company hit hard times. He now works in his family's general store.
Okay, thanks, sir. Still lost 2 permanent jobs. I still to this day don't have health insurance. I'm pretty bitter about it, in all honesty. If it says Westinghouse on it, and I can avoid it, that sounds a little blunt. I won't have anything to do with it. Because I put in a lot of time out there, and now I have to compete with somebody from Mexico.
While some American workers feel they are competing with Mexican workers for jobs, small towns like Union City are forced into bidding wars with other towns for the factory jobs that remain here.
God, you got to buy your jobs. They'll come to you and say, you build me a new factory, may cost you $3 million. You build it the way I want it, and I'll guarantee you, I'll lease it for 5 years. And there's no way that you can pay off a factory, $3 million factory, in 3 years. And they're only going, or 5 years, and they're only going to guarantee you they're going to stay 5 years.
Here, this is Perry.
back, people were making $10 to $12 an hour. And we've got people now that would jump on a $5 an hour job. I would like to see it go back the way it was 5 or 6 years ago when people could feed and clothe their kids by themselves with a lot of pride.
I'm worried my children won't have the opportunity to grow up, live, and see their kids grow up in this town. My father worked for 43 years at the Union City Body Company, which is where I'm employed. I would like to think that my son, if he can't be a professional, everybody'd like to see their sons and daughters be doctors, lawyers, or teachers, but not everybody's sons and daughters can do that. So I'm hoping that there's at least an industry left in this town where they can provide for their family, live comfortably, and be proud of what they're doing.
The average employment in manufacturing is roughly 18.3 million workers. That's lower than it was a quarter of a century ago. And to put that in another perspective, this year, for the first time in American history, the number of people working for government will exceed the number of people working in manufacturing jobs.
Donald Barlett and James Steele are investigative reporters for the Philadelphia Inquirer. Their Pulitzer Prize-winning stories on the troubled U.S. economy have been republished and are now a best-selling book called America, What Went Wrong.
So much has been skewed in the last generation to encourage the flight of jobs offshore, whether it's under this competitiveness angle or the State Department promoting its various interests or special interest groups, but we've completely neglected folks at home.
Free trade means there are no tariffs or barriers on goods exported or imported between countries. Sounds simple, but the ramifications are staggering.
We seek a new deal with the Americans, one that shields our trade from shifting political winds, one that protects Canada from the vast arsenal of regulatory and legal weapons that can be used to restrict our trade, one that stimulates investment and productivity, and most important, jobs.
In 1989, the U.S. signed a free trade agreement with Canada. Just a few years later, Canadian workers are marching in the streets because thousands of jobs have moved out of Canada and into the American South and to Mexico, where wages and benefits are lower.
Canadians have lost a tremendous amount of jobs. Hundreds of thousands of jobs have been lost in Canada directly because of this agreement. Companies have moved from Ontario into New York and into Michigan and other places, out west as well, because they had...
Jeff Foe is an economist who has done extensive studies on the implications of free trade for the American workforce.
Now, if Canada was devastated, having only a small advantage in wages or disadvantage in wages with the United States, how is the United States going to be disadvantaged when Mexican workers make 1/7 to 1/10 of what the average American worker makes?
The next step in opening up trade barriers on the continent is a free trade agreement with Mexico. Trade representatives acting for President Bush and President Salinas of Mexico have hammered out an agreement that must be voted on by the U.S. Congress. In 1991, Congress voted for a fast-track agreement on free trade.
Well, we're already seeing terrific growth of exports to Mexico, even with the moderate freeing up of trade that they did in 1987, and obviously...
Alan Reynolds is an economist with the Hudson Institute, a conservative think tank based in Indianapolis. He says he doesn't understand the strong opposition to free trade from workers because he believes ultimately Mexico will open a huge new market that will create many new jobs in the United States.
We get out of the sweatshop business and into the high-tech business, that export business.
For a look at how free trade is already playing out with Mexico, we go to the U.S.-Mexican border, where free trade has been operational for almost 30 years. Just across the border from San Diego, California, thousands of new American-owned companies have set up shop in Tijuana. These plants are called maquiladoras. The maquiladora program began in 1965 when Mexico set up a free trade zone with the United States that runs over 1,500 miles along the border and extends 12.5 miles into Mexico. Here on the border, international companies are able to move products in for assembly and out for export. The only duty they pay is on labor costs, and the labor costs in Mexico are very low.
The minimum wage is 93 cents an hour. We could save you anywhere from $10,000 to $15,000 per employee.
Ruben Esparza is sales manager for Assembled in Mexico. Esparza's firm is known as a shelter operation, a one-stop shopping center for U.S. companies making the jump to Mexico. Shelter operators deal with Mexican government permits, find and lease factory sites, and contract workers. They also sometimes act as fronts for companies that want to maintain a low profile in Mexico.
We take advantage of lower labor costs and the availability of labor in Mexico. We administer you completely in Mexico under our shelter program, whereas you, the client, would have no legal entity or responsibilities in Mexico. We would shelter you, if you will, from that type of legal exposure in Mexico. Probably most attractive is the young population of Mexico in general.
It is a young workforce and a young population. Half of the people in Mexico are under 15 years old.
We've grown from about 50 employees.
One of Esparza's clients is Fred Hirschman. Hirschman moved his blue bottle and wood products assembly plant from Santa Barbara to Tijuana 2 years ago.
We needed to be more competitive, and we also needed to add on to our factory in Santa Barbara County, and the county was totally no growth, so we weren't able to expand. So we had to move someplace, and so we combined the two, and we're here.
You're not escaping to Mexico to escape the EPA or escape the AQMP. You're simply finding a better alternative for becoming more competitive in the marketplace.
They also work a longer work week, so you get the benefit of a longer work week as well.
What do workers here in your factory get paid, do you think? That's all contracted through our services, and really, if we put bonuses on top of their minimum wage, again, we've gone through the minimum wage, and their bonuses help bring up that standard.
Hirschman later told us he paid his workers $2.75 an hour, but would not allow us to ask the workers about their wages.
Yes, we're taking away low-end type, assembly-type jobs, but we're creating other high-tech type industry in the United States, and in California especially. Mexico has not developed enough to be able to supply the raw materials needed for its production. For example, cardboard boxes, for example, labels, all those types of things are still going to have to be produced in the United States.
We seem to be on the brink of an agreement between Canada, the United States, and Mexico that will give the citizens and the corporations in those three countries a big boost in world competition.
Judge Morris represents the National Association of Manufacturers.
Yes, there are certain production jobs that may be done today that tomorrow will be done in Mexico. There's some jobs that may be done today in Mexico that will be done tomorrow in the United States. But the bigger point is there's going to be more economic activity. There's going to be more growth. Mexico is North America's great growth project.
Well, the reason American companies are moving to Mexico is for the cheap labor. What they want to do is invest in facilities in Mexico, make products there using cheap labor, not having to worry about environmental and health and safety standards, and ship those products back to the United States where they can undercut production made here in America.
Driving across the United States on old Route 66 takes you through Springfield, Missouri. For the past 25 years, the Zenith plant has been a fixture in the town of Springfield and at the center of the lives of many of its residents.
The American worker. Some people have forgotten the craftsmanship he brings to his job. Some say he's not as important as he used to be. Well, to that, we politely answer, bunk. At Zenith, Americans like these produce the color TV that service technicians named more than any other as the one that needs fewest repairs. American workers, Zenith workers, they make sure the quality goes in before the name goes on.
Quality goes in before the name goes on. And I can't say that now.
I know too many people that are still out of work. And the ones that are working, a lot of them are just averaging $5, maybe $6 an hour if they really get a good job.
I'd hate to think at the age of 43 that I had to go and swing hamburgers. But that's what I'm looking at.
These workers are among the 1,500 people who lost their jobs in Springfield when Zenith decided to move its last American-based television assembly plant to Mexico. John Piney worked at Zenith for over 24 years.
This plant was the last American-owned manufacturer of color television sets. When I started work in 1968, there was like 28 companies in the United States manufacturing color television sets.
John says when the factory moved to Springfield 20 years ago, it was the beginning of Zenith's long-range strategy to move to lower-wage areas.
We can kind of relate to what's happening to us now is because we took this work away from Chicago.
We believe that Zenith has tried longer, has tried harder, and has tried more successfully than any other United States company to protect the jobs of its American employees. It is now apparent, however, that unless we take actions that will result in the moving of about 5,000 jobs to lower labor cost areas, it will be impossible for us to protect the interest of our stockholders and the interests of some 15,000 Zenith employees whose jobs will remain in the United States.
Zenith began closing plants in the United States in the late 1970s. At this time, Zenith was moving operations both to Mexico and to Taiwan. In addition to working for low wages, Zenith employees in these countries were putting in 10 to 14-hour days. Zenith representatives declined to appear in this program, but told us, quote, domestic TV industry profitability has been devastated by severe price erosion caused by dumping and by the inaction of the U.S. government in enforcing our trade laws. The Zenith Corporation now employs over 19,000 Mexicans in 5 border cities. Most Zenith workers are eligible for extended unemployment benefits because their plant moved out of the country.
And you'll take this over to desk 22, drop it in their basket, and they'll call you by your name. And, well, there's so many people out of work in this town, and this will make work harder to find. There's more competition for the unemployed.
About 50 of the former Zenith workers were able to get jobs down the road at the Sweetheart Cup factory. Rick Fry is training to run the printing presses that produce drink cups for fast food chains like Wendy's and Kentucky Fried Chicken.
I consider myself very, very lucky because Sweetheart took me in, and I can't say enough good stuff about them. You know, they seem to really be committed to having their factories here in the United States, and they have a good pay scale, and they expect you to work, but they pay you for it.
Rick Fry worked at Zenith for 10 years. He and his fellow workers tried to keep the plant open by taking an 8.5% cut in their wages.
I don't know about all the other people, but me and my wife both work, and making $7 an hour just really ran it close.
When the contract came up for renewal in 1991, Rick felt like there was nothing they could do to save it this time.
People would be giving everything they had out there. I'd never seen people work as hard and fast as the people out there at Zenith. But yet, we were not profitable enough to keep our jobs.
For every $1 billion that's in Mexico that's coming back U.S. owned, we're going to lose 22,000 jobs, which figures out...
For 14 years, Bob Mingus was president of the IBEW local at Zenith.
We would rather work for a living at decent wages, having good benefits, produce a good product, and compete. But how can we compete against $1.62 an hour?
He wanted everybody to be okay. You know, it was such a stress on him. I can't explain the worry he had for everybody out there. There's a lot of things.
Anita and Bob Mingus were one of the many husband and wife teams that worked at the Zenith plant.
He just took time out for everybody. And I think eventually, it just kind of caught up with him. That he was real stressed out about the fact that his hands were tied, and he would cry because there wasn't nothing he could do to save it.
In the midst of negotiations to shut down the plant, Bob Mingus suffered a heart attack and died. As a skeleton crew leaves Zenith in Springfield, thousands of workers end their shift in Reynosa, Mexico. Zenith is one of 2,113 American companies that have moved operations to Mexico. These are Fortune 500 firms who have invested in modern new industrial parks on the border. Big companies like Zenith send buses to neighborhoods in the surrounding areas to pick up the workers each day. This is the home of a Zenith worker in Matamoros, Mexico. Elvia Lopez makes 199,000 pesos, or about $62, for a 60-hour week. Her husband is a street vendor, so Elvia's income from Zenith is crucial to the family's survival. But now Senora Lopez is on disability because she has sores all over her body that will not heal. She told us the materials and solvents they use at Zenith cause these health problems, and that other workers have the same symptoms. Maria Guadalupe Torres worked in Maquiladoras for 20 years. Now she is an organizer for a group called Obrera Comunidad. She meets maquiladora workers by going to the colonias where they live. Many workers call Guadalupe Torres Lupita. She tries to teach them what rights they have under Mexican law. Most of the workers in this colonia come from a small town in central Mexico. This colonia has been flooded for over a year.
There hasn't been any official person to help get the water out of here. It's the source of a lot of infection.
McAllen, Texas, Reynosa, Mexico, America's new address for international business. Under the Maquiladora or Twin Plant program, your company can bring raw materials or components into Mexico, where they can be assembled by one of the lowest cost labor forces in the world.
First of all, let me say, no one wants to go to Mexico in the manufacturing business. They have three choices. They can go to the Pacific Rim, they can go to Mexico, or they can go out of business. And many companies are faced with those alternatives.
Mike Allen is president of the Economic Development Corporation in McAllen, Texas. He says promoting the maquilas in Mexico brings service and auxiliary jobs to border towns in Texas, like McAllen.
It's hard for a man who's losing his job, that's been with a company for a long time, and I sympathize with that. But, you know, the thing that I say, why are jobs in Detroit more important than jobs in McAllen, Texas?
But what's it really like living on the border?
This promotional videotape by McAllen Economic Development Corporation shows why Texas business operators are excited by the prospects of free trade.
It's the country club life.
They say American managers moving to the border region and Mexican consumers shopping in the U.S. will provide a big boost to the Texas economy.
And I tell people that are criticizing the maquila industry, go talk to the Mexican workers, and not someone that's been staged, or just pick out some people, especially where you have whole families now who may be working, 4 or 5 brothers and sisters are working in this industry. Their whole economy has changed.
We talked to 5 sisters who each work over 40 hours a week in Matamoros maquiladora plants. It takes all their wages, plus the additional income they get from selling watermelons, to keep this house and put food on the table. Annalene Duenas works at Trico, a company that makes windshield wipers for U.S. auto manufacturers.
Windshield wipers?
Annalene says she must assemble 1,900 windshield wipers by a certain time each day. This repetitive motion has caused her to suffer from repetitive stress injuries.
Queremos el trabajo. Necesitamos el trabajo, todos los que estamos aquí. We want the work. We need the work, all of us here. And we need more jobs, but not with the conditions we are in now. We need protection for our health and naturally better salaries.
Annalene's job used to be done in the United States. For over 70 years, Trico manufactured windshield wipers in Buffalo, New York. But most of Trico's production has moved to Matamoros, and only a few hundred workers are left in Trico's Buffalo plant. Over 220,000 auto parts jobs have been lost in the United States since 1979. The Mexican auto industry employs over 100,000 people. These new jobs in Mexico were created when the Big Three and other auto parts manufacturers decided to leave the Midwestern towns they'd grown up in. The state of Indiana has been one of the hardest hit by depression in the American auto industry. Nick Codrea has lived and worked in Kokomo, Indiana all his life. For years, he worked in the GM Delco electronics plant, building radios for General Motors vehicles.
Yes, I used to sit on the line for years and years and built the best radio that was built in the world here, yes.
In 1985, GM Delco moved most of its radio building operations to Reynosa, Mexico.
We've lost an entire radio manufacturing base that we've had here for 40 years is all built in Mexico now. We've went from, at Delco Electronics, 10,000 hourly employees down to probably 6,500.
When the big layoffs hit GM Delco, Nick took early retirement and got a job working for the United Auto Workers Union. He went on a tour with other union officials to the new Delco plant in Mexico.
We was amazed at the modern facilities they put up down there, and what sticks out in my mind most was they have plants in which thousands of people work, and the parking lots they build are for 30 or 40 cars, and there may be 3 of them in it. And the workers, they drive up in the taxis that are built for 18 or 20 people, and they'll have 30 or 40 packed in there. The workers that work down there can't even afford to buy the products that they build. You know, that was one thing that did impress me.
There's waiting lists for American cars. We know that all they have to do is to release the to open it up a little bit, and they'll come in there. You have to line up to get a Lincoln Town car or a Corvette. That's the kind of things they're allowing in, certain models in small quantities.
And the people who really look at these things in dollars and cents, the people who make film, the Kodaks, the people who make supplies like Rubbermaid products that you buy in the store, they look at Mexico and they see a rising middle class. They see people who will be able to buy their products in the future, and that's why they want this agreement to go through.
There is this notion that American firms want to move to Mexico in order to service the Mexican consumer. Well, on the face of it, that's ridiculous. The economy, the market economy of Mexico is about 3 or 4% of that of the United States. Most Mexicans are dirt poor.
And when they sell us, let's say, tomatoes, get the money, then they turn around and buy our cars and our computers. It's not necessarily such a bad deal.
Alan Reynolds is confident that free trade with Mexico will create a demand for U.S.-made products.
It all comes down to, are you in the right industry or the wrong one? Now, if you're on the losing edge of the line, your attitude's a little different.
Jerry and Pauletta Pinnock are worried they may be in the wrong industry. Jerry has worked at GM Delco for 18 years. Pauletta has been there for 22 years.
It's been shown in the past that if the automobile industry in this country, and I don't mean just General Motors, but Chrysler and Ford as well, if we hurt, everybody hurts.
I feel her dad had the American dream because he worked at a General Motors plant or a factory for 33 years and retired and enjoyed his retirement while he was living, but I don't feel I've got it, and I don't have any security about having it either.
I could be laid off tomorrow with 22 years in, and there I'd be.
We've seen more McDonald's than we have car places or factories, or so I don't know. Indiana could be the McDonald's state of the union if they keep up, because we won't be working on much. Not here.
Free trade supporters say new jobs will be created in this country because U.S.-based manufacturers will have to produce high-tech machinery and the infrastructure for Mexico's new factories.
There will be some whole new infrastructures being put in Mexico and also in Russia, for that matter, and we want American companies to be part of that business. The question about NAFTA is, are we going to encourage this growth or discourage it? It's not really about whether we lose jobs. That's a red herring.
Well, a little logic will tell you that that means that for a short period of time, there'll be some growth in employment in the United States as we build machinery to send down to Mexico for them to fill their factories up with it. But after those factories are completed, what it means is they will then be able to produce enormous amounts of goods with cheap labor that will then come flooding back into the United States to undercut jobs here. So it's very short-sighted.
If you continue to erode the manufacturing base, what will millions of people do in this country? I mean, what kind of work will they have? What kind of a society will we have?
In Danville, Illinois, one more factory is shutting down and moving to Mexico, and it's almost more than the town can bear.
I don't know who's going to turn the lights out when the last person leaves town, but it will have a devastating effect on this community. Even if we're making $5, $6 an hour, we can't compete with people who are making $30 a week living in one-room adobe huts with dirt floors. We can't take our standard of living back to that level.
Jerry Wright grew up in Danville, Illinois, right across from the plant where his mother went to work every day. At the end of the year, this Valmont electric plant will leave Danville and move to Mexico. Valmont owns the plant now, but until 1987 it was owned and operated by the General Electric Corporation.
It was neat to have Mom working across the street, and I used to set up my lemonade stand out here in the summertime, and as the workers got off, I'd be out here selling them lemonade or Kool-Aid.
Danville has changed a lot since then. One of the things that scares Jerry Wright the most is that the young people are moving out.
I'm worried about my town. I've got two brothers that have left this town to find work. They're part of that 5,000 population loss. I've got a sister whose plant closed 3 years ago who can't find work.
Like many small Midwestern towns, Danville is being abandoned by its young people. Because Danville is being abandoned by the factories that once made it possible for the young to stay. Factories used to fill up the streets here, and workers used to spend their paychecks in the stores, bars, and restaurants surrounding the factories. Not anymore.
We were busy all the time. Now we have to wait on the fall of the year to get busy. It's bad that all the work's going overseas, all the jobs going overseas. In my opinion, they should send welfare overseas and bring the jobs home.
General Motors used to have several factories here, but now there's only the foundry left, and it's up for sale. With Valmont moving to Mexico and an uncertain future for the foundry, the town is nervous.
I own that store right across the street, Mag's Menswear, and people aren't too anxious to buy clothes when they don't know if they're going to be working next week. My husband works for GM, and he has been laid off over the course of, the last couple of years a number of times.
We have a lot of people out of work. We've even seen some homeless around here lately.
Something's wrong, and we're probably not any different in Danville, Illinois than anywhere in the country. So we gotta learn to stick together, whether we wear a tie or whether we wear a work shirt each day.
Roger Bowen represents Danville on the County Board of Supervisors.
When you see the folks leaving your community because you can't find them jobs, you're also hurting your government, because we have to try to balance a budget each and every year. But the key thing is we've got to have jobs for this country, and we've got to keep the middle class alive and well, and we're not doing that.
Over 1,000 people used to work at Valmont Electric. Now only a few are left. While the company hopes for a more profitable future for this factory in Juarez, Mexico, the workers left behind in Danville, Illinois are not as optimistic.
Well, we're going to find work at, and they crying about the college people just getting graduated from college can't get a job. So you know it's going to affect, it's going to hurt. But we just got to keep our heads up, right?
And I worked out here 33 and a half years, and you just expected to be here, until you retire.
I've been here almost 26 years. And none of us know what we're going to do now.
A lot of them will be losing their homes, I think.
Remember, Bonnie, when we got these, when we
Yeah.
first started working there? Yeah, that was a good time.
Cheryl Sisk and Bonnie Andrews worked together for over 20 years at the GE Valmont plant.
Danville will never, ever be what it was when we started working, because General Motors was here big time. And the majority of the people that are our age or older built those plants up to what they are today and gave them their ideas, their input, their know-how. And now the older workers are going down the drain.
Both of them are trying to find new careers late in life. Bonnie is studying to be a practical nurse. Sherry is trying to learn bookkeeping.
We have nothing to show for it. We've lost our jobs. A lot of us are probably going to lose our pride and sink really way down low. I don't know why the government, which I feel like it's all government and politics, of the United States feels like that they should make the rich people richer, because what are they going to do with the middle class and the younger ones? Are they going to machine gun us down like they did in Hitler's days or whatever? I mean, what are they going to do?
I would try to help that worker, but I would not try to explain to that worker. There are certain situations in which one cannot offer a satisfactory explanation to the individual person impacted. Change is inevitable. To think that not having NAFTA is going to preserve jobs is true folly. The thing that preserves American jobs is growth, and that's what this agreement is about.
Although Mexican President Carlos Salinas de Gortari has pushed hard for free trade, Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas, leader of PRD, a Mexican opposition party, says free trade will not be a boon for Mexican workers.
Negative effects. I would say that mostly negative effects of trade opening. Unemployment has increased. Wages also decreased in a very drastic way. It's positive if you consider that jobs are created, but maybe sometimes that wouldn't be enough.
The Rio Grande River marks the border between the U.S. and Mexico near El Paso, Texas. While many Mexican workers are fleeing poverty and crossing the river for better jobs on the other side, American companies are moving in the opposite direction. The effects of this movement are being felt on both sides of the border. In El Paso, Texas, Mexican-American workers are afraid free trade will jeopardize their newly found security. This El Paso garment factory is a unionized plant. Most of the workers here turning out these designer blue jeans are Mexican-American. Jose Najera has worked at this plant for 5 years. He says wages are very different south of the border.
So we're earning since about $8 an hour. They receive $5 a day. Of course, the difference is very hard.
Most of Jose's co-workers share his concern that the free trade agreement will ship their jobs to Mexico.
We are afraid to lose jobs. And the reason why we are afraid about it because we are part of the society too. We consume a lot of products. And we don't have money to spend. I think everybody's going to be affected on that, not only us.
The U.S. garment and textile industries have been hit hard by the offshore move of American companies. Since 1973, over 400,000 textile and garment jobs have been lost in the United States, mostly due to imports. Many of these jobs have gone to maquiladoras in Guatemala, where wages are only $2 a day.
More than ever, people need to be concerned about the border because...
Primitivo Rodriguez is a co-founder of the Committee for Justice in the Maquiladoras.
We have a definition of the new reality that the unregulated economic integration is bringing to the world.
The committee, a group of religious, environmental, labor, and community leaders from across the United States, is meeting with Mexican workers.
And their impact on the ecology of the community.
They have come to Juarez to learn about environmental and working conditions on the border.
What we witness at the border is what we will see more and more all over the place. So the border is, in a sense, one of the greatest, clearest laboratories of what the future might provide.
Just outside of Juarez, over 600 barrels of toxic waste have been dumped and are being cleaned up by Mexico's Environmental and Public Works Ministry. The barrels contain industrial solvents like trichloroethylene, xylene, and acetone. The Committee for Justice in the Maquiladoras tours the dump site as Mexican workers continue the cleanup effort.
This stuff came from the United States.
Okay.
And it came from El Paso.
Craig Merriles is with the National Toxics Coalition.
Well, what we found was waste that was shipped from the United States and dumped here in Mexico. This was taken off one of the drums, and there were many of them that had these official EPA registration numbers that were shipped from companies across the border. There's probably groundwater that would be contaminated for decades, if not centuries here, from the dumping that's gone on here. Well, there's no excuse for what we're seeing here today. There's no reason that these things shouldn't be carefully regulated and that companies shouldn't be fined and punished. People should go to jail for doing this.
This toxic waste dump in Juarez is just one example of the serious environmental problems that have arisen with the maquiladora business boom on the border. Over half of the border's 2,100 maquiladora plants produce toxic wastes, according to the Mexican Environmental Ministry. The ministry says there is not enough money to enforce the environmental laws that do exist. Business Week magazine called the area a 2,000-mile garbage dump. The Wall Street Journal called the border region a sinkhole of abysmal living conditions and environmental degradation. The trail of toxics is being passed on to the next generation. 17 babies were born without brains in Texas and Matamoros in 1991. Scientific studies have linked this condition, known as anencephaly, to industrial solvents used in maquiladoras. Families from all over Mexico have come to Juarez to work in the maquiladoras. They live in these colonias in the hills above the city. Many say their life here is not much better than the one they left behind. This couple moved here from Durango and now works for Johnson & Johnson. 8 in their family live in this house partly constructed of cardboard. This young man got a job in an electronics company and was able to move in with his uncle's family. His uncle tried to find work in the maquiladoras, but was told they were only looking for people under 30 years old.
O sea que quieren puro joven.
They want only young people.
Según tengo entendido que quieren puro
30
joven.
years old, and that's what I understand, that all they want is young people.
John Riojas is a Teamster vice president, representing his union on this tour by the Committee for Justice in the Maquiladoras.
What we plan to do is hopefully help some unions from Mexico try to raise the living standards of people, the workers on this side.
I'm a Catholic priest, a Franciscan, and in studying the Church's social doctrine, the Church has walked with the workers in their struggle for a just wage. A worker has a right to a just wage, to a salary that can support his family.
And plastic glasses.
Elena works in a maquiladora that produces plastic lenses. In her 7th month of pregnancy, she's very concerned about the acetone she breathes in every day at work. We asked if the company provided any protection.
No, they didn't give me anything. At first, they moved me from cleaning with acetone, but after a few months, they put me back without protection.
Her husband, Arturo, works 2nd shift at Autovidrio, a plant that produces Ford windshields. He makes about $30 for 48 hours of work. This family of 5 lives in a 1-room structure with no running water. Even with 2 salaries, they sometimes don't have enough money for food. Arturo is concerned about safety conditions at the windshield factory.
Sí, es bastante peligroso. Yes, it's very dangerous. En los ojos, en los vidrios. For our eyes.
Do they provide safety equipment?
Les dan equipo de seguridad, de protección. Sí, pero no es lo suficiente porque... Yes, but it's not enough.
The Committee for Justice in the Maquiladoras went to the plant to see if they could check on safety conditions inside Autovidrio.
This has to be approved by a Ford corporate, and here's the telephone number.
A Ford representative told us that Autovidrio is a wholly owned subsidiary of Ford.
And this is a Ford corporate policy?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
In 1990, 16-year-old Julio Urbaleos was killed in the glass crusher while working night shift at the Autovidrio windshield plant.
He apparently became entangled in one of the exposed conveyor belts, and he was found head and shoulders down in a mound of broken glass shards.
Robin Collins is an attorney who represents Julio Urbaleos' mother, Mrs. Macias. Autovidrio paid a death benefit of $1,430 to Mrs. Macias, paid $2,170 in funeral expenses, and rented a bus so other employees could attend the funeral. Robin Collins has filed a lawsuit on behalf of Mrs. Macias that would allow her to file a death claim in the United States rather than Mexico.
There's no doubt that you can set up a plant, but if you control a plant completely in a foreign country, you're going to have to play by American rules regarding the safety of the workers that are in that plant.
We want to send a message. Moral behavior knows no boundaries, no borders. What would be considered wrong in the United States of America is wrong in Mexico, too.
The Committee for Justice in the Maquiladoras addressed a Senate hearing on the free trade agreement.
They are turning the border into a 2,000-mile love canal, the largest toxic lagoon ever known to humankind.
My gosh, all of a sudden we're worried about Mexican living conditions. You know, their housing's lousy. Well, of course, it's a poor country, you know. Of course, the farmers come and they overcrowd the border areas. Or we're suddenly worried about the environment. This is somebody up in Michigan. What's he care about the border environment? You know, well, in other words, they try to cast a moral sort of aside on all this.
One needs to look at is what's the total picture like? Is the total level of employment going up? Is the total salary compensation going up? Is the standard of living going up? All of these things we think are more likely to happen with a NAFTA, with growth in Mexico.
I'm afraid that if this does not become a political issue, this little treaty is going to slip through before anyone realizes it, and the devastation to the American labor force and the average American working family will be very, very serious.
As economists, business lobbyists, and politicians make plans for our free trade future, working people on both sides of the border are trying to learn what fate awaits them.
We're the only industrial nation in this world whose government doesn't realize the importance of protecting our jobs. You go to Europe, you go to Japan, and those governments will do whatever's necessary to protect their industry and to make sure that those jobs stay in their countries. This country just seems to, whatever the corporations want to do, whatever will pay their stockholders a bigger profit is all right. And they don't care what happens to the little guy.
What we have now is a kind of economic, cowboy economic system at work in a global economy. Germany has an industrial policy. Japan has an industrial policy. We don't. And it's something that's going to have to be developed, because otherwise you're talking about millions and millions and millions of workers who are going to be consigned to the bottom of the economic pile in this country. And what is going to happen to this society when that occurs?
Will Mexican workers quickly prosper and become free-spending consumers who will buy cars, jeans, and appliances made in this country? Or will American workers face a change in living standards and find that the hills above Juarez, the Tijuana border, and the creeks of Matamoros look a lot like their free trade future?
Streets are filled with memories where dreams have been shut down. They watch their children leaving like the factories in the town. Business chases profits across the Rio Grande. Not long ago this Midwest town thought it was the promised land.
With baskets carrying all they own and dreams that drive them on, towards the maquiladora, thousands journey forth. But if girl is all at an hour and poison underneath, like the south of the border, far from the promised land.
From Midwest towns of Florida
to Matamoros, Caborcha,
promises are broken
and their dreams are taken back.
both sides of the border.
We share the same blue sky.
Both sides of the river, we are barely getting by.
Both sides of the river,
We are barely getting by.
For more information about this series, We Do the Work, contact your local public television station or We Do the Work at 1250 Addison Street, Suite 213A, Berkeley, California, 94702.
Iraqi aircraft, and as of this date has been honored. During the first couple of days, Allied forces flew very aggressively, demonstrating the coalition resolve. The intensity of flights have since been scaled back, and sufficient forces continue to provide surveillance and protection of the no-fly zone.
Still to come, the C-17 edges closer to the Air Force inventory, and the kids of Chernobyl on vacation as Air Force News continues.
The adventure begins here. Each month, Airman Magazine champions the Air Force story with award-winning lighting and photography. For news you should know, read Airman Magazine.
93% of incumbents get reelected, so perpetual cycle, man. Get out, vote, you, the youth of America.
A Montana Air National Guard F-16 crashed while on a training mission 20 miles south of Moody Air Force Base, Georgia. Captain Jeffrey Connors, assigned to the 120th Fighter Group, successfully ejected from his aircraft and was reported in good condition. A board of officers will investigate the mishap.
Zero tolerance is a phrase being used concerning sexual harassment. In an effort to put cases of sexual harassment in the history books, Staff Sergeant David Pullen reports the training is being focused at new arrivals, the trainees at Lackland.
Last year, 39,000 new Air Force recruits went through basic training. During their 6-week stay, they receive a 3-hour block of instruction in human relations. Included in this block is a 45-minute section on sexual harassment. The instruction isn't a new addition to the coursework, but it is a hot topic these days. In testimony on Capitol Hill, Chief of Staff General Merrill McPeak reiterated the service's commitment of providing this type of training to its newest members.
We have our share of people who need to be trained, and we have training programs for that, and we have remedies that correct that kind of behavior.
Each day, Lackland Air Force Base puts an average of 100 trainees through its human relations course. The small staff of 20 academic instructors believes this initial exposure to the subject of sexual harassment is the most important.
We feel that this is a very important class because of the fact that it is the initial training, and when they leave here, although they'll have other classes, it's the first class that needs to make a difference.
Once the trainees graduate, they're expected to make a difference by making the connection between human relations and mission accomplishment. Staff Sergeant David Pullen, Air Force News.
The new uniform has reached its midpoint test period with varied reactions. Staff Sergeant Michelle Hood has the results.
The purpose of the mid-data study was to capture the evaluations of the new uniform wearers early, while their opinions are still fresh in their minds. Feedback on the new uniform is varied, but overall the reaction has been positive.
By and large, I really like the uniform. I think it's cleaner, it's crisper.
The uniform itself is very comfortable. I got some problems with the length, the wrinkles. Other than that, it's a very comfortable uniform.
The uniform wear test continues through November, at which time surveys and uniforms will be turned in for final analysis. From Kelly Air Force Base, I'm Staff Sergeant Michelle Hood, Air Force News.
In a related story, officers participating have been notified to stop wearing the striped shoulder marks on the shirt epaulets. According to Air Force Chief of Staff General Merrill McPeak, the stripe-style shoulder rank for officers is a non-starter.
As we head for the 21st century, the Air Force is preparing for its next airlifter. Training for pilots, loadmasters, and maintenance workers is now underway. Tech Sergeant Ray Clips reports from Charleston Air Force Base, South Carolina.
The C-17, the Air Force's newest transport plane, is designed to fulfill airlift needs into the next century. The aircraft will carry large combat equipment, troops, or humanitarian aid to airfields worldwide. While test aircraft such as this one are being built in California, the people who will fly and work on the C-17 are now undergoing training at Charleston Air Force Base, South Carolina. At their workstations, individuals undergo self-paced, self-taught training with a computer. One pilot sees a difference already between the C-17 and other airlifters.
I think it's a fantastic airplane. Incredible redundancy. I thought C-141 had a lot of redundancy, but this airplane is, all the systems have backups, and it looks like a very reliable and survivable airplane from what I've seen so far.
Training isn't confined to computers at desks. Pilots also have the opportunity to practice landings and takeoffs and a C-17 simulator. It's as realistic as possible. With an instructor nearby, pilot and co-pilot have the chance to practice takeoffs and landings. Combined with the computer and static ground training, the simulator completes the 3 levels of instruction the aircrew receives. The people who will fly the transport aren't the only ones familiarizing themselves with a new airlifter. 4 loadmasters have their own trainer linking them directly with the station in the pilot simulator. This marks the first time people of both specialties have trained together. The C-17 will be able to accommodate larger cargo than a C-141. Using models, loadmasters can practice placing equipment into the cargo bay of a scaled-down airlifter. In the classroom, instructors from the 317th Field Training Detachment teach maintainers about the aircraft systems. In this class, it's jet engine mechanics.
I can't wait for it to get here, actually. This classroom is great, but it's kind of confining, and I want to get out there and really work on the airplanes, and I miss the airplane. I want it to, looking forward to having it.
Pilots and loadmasters are scheduled to complete their training at Charleston in November. Then it's on to Edwards Air Force Base, California, for more instruction.
It's been more than 6 years since the nuclear reactor meltdown at Chernobyl. Today, the disaster's effects are still being felt by thousands of people. Staff Sergeant Jim Frost met a group of 40 children, survivors of that disaster, who visited Biddeford.
The visit was a nice change of pace for these children. It was a day off from medical exams they've been taking at a German hospital in Trier. These kids live in cities and towns in the former Soviet Union, areas that were coated with radioactive fallout from the Chernobyl nuclear reactor meltdown. They came to Germany for several weeks of medical testing to see how much damage the radiation has done.
The children were impressed with the smiles on the people's faces, the kindness that came from all the people around them.
The children's visit to Biddeford Air Base was sponsored by the 36th Supply Squadron and the Officers' Wives Club. During their stay, the kids got a chance to look around and to make some new friends.
I liked the whole visit, the whole thing, but I liked the F-15 most of all.
The children who came to Biddeford Air Base didn't speak English, but that didn't seem to matter. They seemed to have a good time anyway. Staff Sergeant Jim Frost, Air Force News, Biddeford Air Base, Germany.
And that puts the wraps on another show of Air Force News. I'm Staff Sergeant Chris Beckwith. We'd like to encourage you to participate in the combined federal campaign. See your unit's representative.
And presidential elections are just around the corner. It's in your hands to help shape our government. I'm Tech Sergeant Jim Langdon. We'll see you next month.
We want to fly fighters just like we did before, and we will be able to do that much quicker than anyone would have imagined. We have the capability, and we certainly have the energy and the morale.
They've been great here with us. They've been giving us security, they've been giving us supplies, they've been helping us, and we couldn't have made it without them. They've really been great.
You get a sense that people really appreciate you being here. I had 3 people that tell me, thanks, we're glad you're here. And they don't have the slightest idea what I'm here doing. But yet they still want to stop and thank us for the effort.